Hey guys, how's it going? Daniel P. Riley here, author and owner of Whimsical Literary Coaching and Services. Today I'm reviewing Heroes Metal 1, How Black the Sky by T.J. Marquis, and as always, there's an interview with the author after this video. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe for more. And if you're a new author looking to add something special to your marketing with a video review, always feel free to contact me at whimsyland.org or DM me on Twitter at Mr. DP Riley. Let's get into it. Heroes Metal 1, How Black the Sky is a fantasy novel by T.J. Marquis and the first book of a series of stories following its protagonist, Pierce. Pierce is a young hero captured during his attempt to adventure in Underland. He acquires a magic sword, Bone Melter, crafted by one of Underland's giant forge masters with a rare enchanted dust, during his escape. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is. Bone Melter quite literally melts bone. I gave it a lightsaber appearance in my head, glowing a brilliant blue. Colors play a major role in this book, in this whole story, as magic dust seems to be the primary mode of enchantment in this world's magic system, and it has a pivotal role later in the tale. For a world with a black sky and red sun, that's a very interesting contrast to me, and there are a lot of those, but first, let's get into the cast a little more. Pierce as the hero struck me as young and possibly having a learning disorder like ADHD. He describes his thoughts and perspectives in very unique and sometimes odd ways that aren't always well received by those he speaks to. He possesses enchanted armor, which gives him an occasionally irritating, overpowered status. But this is intentional, as Pierce must be powerful in his own way to fit in amongst the legendary heroes of Overland, Gorgonbane. These heroes have disbanded after their string of adventures ended. They're seasoned fighters with unique skills and very deep backgrounds individually and as a unit. Axborn the Cleaver acts as the leader of the troop with his wife Scythia by his side. Now these two are an incredible couple. Scythia's warmth and dedication to honor and duty complement Axborn's steadfast strength and will, which can be a bit cold and brutish. Together, they make an impressive duo capable of handling anything thrown at them through skill, determination, and their loyal love for each other. Don't think for a moment that Scythia isn't her own woman. Her legends is explained through the story as wholly separated from Axborn's, and her skills at fighting as well as enchanted jewel crafting set her apart from her husband. Both of them carry a status beyond the combined legend of their pairing. Agrathor, on the other hand, has more gruffness than Axborn, and with good reason. The skeletal magic user lost his humanity and his flesh, leaving him disconnected and alone after Gorgonbane went their separate ways. Agrathor seems to specialize in lightning and storms, wielding a spear for combat that doesn't warrant explosive electrical displays. He's by far my favorite of the troop. The second, or S, as Gorgonbane call her, is a wizard devoted to one aspect of the theological background of this book. What seems to be a monastic order of magic users who dedicate their entirety to the cultivation and exploration of all things beyond Underland and Overland. The first is the Archmagus, whose tower resides on the edge of a magical chasm, and he is utterly detached from what we would consider the human condition. S is very close to that same enlightenment, though she still holds attachments to her friends in Gorgonbane and her own beliefs. Despite this, she excelled in magic use and became a prodigious wizard. It's not surprising, as she is a Supergen, a race of powerful beings from Underland. I'm not going to go into any major details there. I don't want to spoil the book for anyone. No doubt you've come to realize that there's a lot of world building in the story, and I've only scratched the surface of it through book 1. TJ designed an incredibly vast layer of worlds and ideas with Heroes Metal, from the religion of Overland's blacksmith god and the glorious path to Underland's dictatorial yet not despotic leader, Cash. There's a ton of mythos to unpack through these chapters alongside the story itself. Cash isn't a rahaha villain, though he has his moments of being a right bastard. Underland's governance feels more like any kingdom turned vaguely evil, and honestly it isn't well developed. Cash gives his people great things and commands respect through brutal reign, while arbitrarily doling out rewards when the whim suits him. That made it a little difficult to really understand. In the start of the book, you get this sense that Underland is a rather demonic place. It turns out not to be through the story, which took some effort to wrap my head around. Despite that, Cash is an enjoyable villain in his moments, powerful and full of a depth that I felt wasn't portrayed effectively. It's not to say it was bad. Cash had moments of pure villainy, but TJ created a character that had a hidden depth that I enjoyed and would have liked to see a little bit more of. Now, Cash's plans to rise up from Underland, despite the clear boundaries and rumored dangers that Overland's environment threaten, is found out by Pierce, who flees back to Overland to warn its people of great danger. This sets off a series of events that lead to the return of Gorgonbane to protect Overland. Much of the first half of the story is Pierce stumbling his way into Axeborn's good graces, and joining the married couple as they travel about to collect the other members of their team. It's fun, and really expresses the depths of their relationships while setting up the gravity and danger very well. One thing that I had trouble with is how TJ wrote the story. It felt very script-like more than story at times, setting the scenes and stages with what felt like bland directives. As a first published book, these minor missteps are expected, and I was constantly delighted by the return to action-packed combat and enjoyable social beats. Having a team of superpowered elite adventurers forces a writer to build a greater threat, and sometimes the combat felt less dire and more flexing as the 5 members of Gorgonbane, Pierce included, mowed through bad guys, monsters, and petty thieves. There are some great twists and turns, though, making Heroes Metal How Black the Sky an entertaining and fun read. I'm told the second book really hits its stride, and I'm looking forward to reading that very soon. All in all, Heroes Metal 1 gets 4 stars for me, and it's a slightly generous 4 stars. Is it whimsical? Definitely. An adventuring fantasy with great characterizations and memorable moments settled between a fresh author's efforts to pace a grand tale of heroism. What it lacked in immersion, it made up for in fresh characters, interesting dialogue, and a sprawling backdrop that I expect great things from in the future. How Black the Sky is building an electrifying, Agrathor pun intended, foundation for what I expect to be an awesome series of books. That said, the issues with the pacing took my mind away from how wonderful the characters were. The only issues with the pacing were born of what you will see is described as a procedural writing format. And I think being script-like over story is why I say generous 4 stars. But for a first book, it's amazing. My first book may not actually be as good as his, to be honest. Now that I'm thinking about it. But you know what they say. Learn from your mistakes and do better. And that's really all we can do, isn't it? And now, without further ado, TJ Marquis. Okay, I'd like to welcome TJ Marquis to the show. His book, Heroes Metal 1, How Black the Sky, was what I reviewed a few moments ago and wanted to get his thoughts. And we're going to start with a very simple question. TJ, what made you want to write Heroes Metal?
So the main thing was the premise that hit me, or the core of it rather, which wasn't even necessarily the plot, but just kind of the vibe feel, which was, I thought it would be really cool to have a story that channeled the vibe of heavy metal. Usually, most times it's kind of the other way around, right? Like you have heavy metal reflecting a fantasy or sci-fi vibe. Sometimes you have like concept albums and stuff like that, or like what's the show, I can't say it, Metalocalypse.
Yeah,
and I didn't necessarily want it to be that on the nose, but I wanted it to channel those ideas and that energy. And I had been listening to a lot of progressive heavy metal, and so if you look at those, listen to those and look at their album art and stuff like that, it's not so much like nitty gritty and violence and action and stuff, but there's like a transcendental aspect to it. Lots of space and like kind of some trippy stuff, and the geometric patterns and just all that kind. So like I kind of wanted to mush that all together into a vibe, and I was just kind of hoping that I would come up with a good plot for it. which at a certain point, I sat down, I outlined it, came up with the characters I wanted, and then just kind of started writing it. But that was the core of the inspiration, was trying to get that vibe.
So kind of going in the other direction from like, I'm old, so I'm going to go back to literally heavy metal. That movie, it's an animated feature, I think, had a lot of scantily clad women and dragons and demons and things. But you were kind of looking for, I guess, an inspiration from that sort of fantastical idea to become a story that you could produce.
Yeah, yeah. And I come across that a lot when I'm writing or coming up with ideas. I want to channel the vibe as much as I can. And what tends to happen is it'll kind of start to take on a life of its own. I'm sure you know this from working on your own stuff, and other writers are going to identify. It's almost never exactly, like the plan never survives contact with the enemy kind of thing. It's never quite what you thought it was going to be, and that's pretty much happened.
Make the plan, execute the plan, throw out the plan.
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, I think for myself, I achieved what I wanted.
Hold on a second. Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. Alexa, stop. Oh, was that? Anyways, let's move on.
Yeah.
I apologize, but we're going to keep that in because it's a little funny.
Yeah.
So, sorry. Okay. What was your inspiration for Pierce and the Gorgonbane team? Because they kind of give me a little bit of anime vibes in that each character is super unique, but they have an extensive history between each other. It was a little bit hard to understand that right in the beginning, but as I was reading through the book, it became more and more in depth and immersive.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I can see that there would be an anime vibe to them as well, because though I'm not like a super fan, I do watch a good amount and kind of internalize that stuff. The main inspiration was to keep with that heavy metal concept and have them reflect in their personalities basically the instruments that I had assigned to them. And kind of as an aside, one of my dreams is to be able to afford a high quality like poster with the characters playing their instruments, just as kind of like a promotional thing. But someday I'll be able to drop a bill on that. But
that sounds wicked.
Yeah, that'd be fun. But anyway, they all have, at least in my mind, the parts that they're associated with. So Pierce is kind of like the like guest soloist kind of guy. Like, you can imagine they caught a video of him on YouTube or something playing his stuff, and they were like, hey, yeah, we want you because we're going to be in town, come join us, and we'll do a collab or whatever. And I kind of wanted him to have that feel. I see Agrathor as the drummer. He's always thinking about feeling the vibration, talking about that stuff. His magic is percussive.
Very.
Yeah, and Axborn kind of holds it down in the middle. So I see him as the main rhythm guitar, just kind of like holding it down in the middle, setting the structure for everything. Scythia, everybody loves girl bassists, and so I kind of saw her as the bassist, right? So she kind of helps her husband hold it down in the center and provide that just kind of the driving force and the main core of the music, or in this case, the main core of the like focus on their missions and whatever they have to do. And then I think of S as being the keyboardist, because she pulls all this stuff right out of the air, the magic, and just provides whatever's lacking based on what her abilities could be, which is kind of how I see the role of the synths and keyboards and stuff. Forget anybody? I think that was it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Individually, Pierce kind of, I saw him as a little bit of the young upstart sort in the way that you portrayed him. And I thought maybe I wanted to ask this specifically, that he was a little developmentally different from like your average person, just in the way that he responded to things. And you made those points a couple of times on how his mind was constantly active. It gave me an ADHD vibe.
That's what I was, yeah, that's what I was going for. I'm not, at least I don't think I am. Sometimes I kind of wish I were. It would explain like some of my other quirks. So I don't know. Maybe I don't think so. In any case, that's what I was going for with Pierce, and so I'm glad that came through.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Very well. Each of the characters very unique, very well described. They had their own voices in my head, which hats off to you on that one, because dialogue can be hard for a lot of us as we're starting out.
Yeah.
Getting the right voice, the right impression to bestow on your reader can be very difficult for early authors. Agrathor, totally cool. Skeletal man, kind of mercurial and electrified, to play the pun.
Yeah.
I liked him a lot, and I kind of, when I first read his introduction, I was like, is he pulling a little bit of Monty Python here with the "some call me Tim" aspect of just standing around blowing stuff up for the fun of it because he can? And that amused me, so it hooked me in for that character really hard. Axe and Scythia were very loving and sort of brutal when they needed to be, which I thought was a really cool aspect of those two characters. And it followed through all the way to the end, which I'm not going to spoil for anybody who hasn't read the book yet. But so I liked their dynamic a lot. The only character that I did have trouble connecting with was S. And I think that's because S was designed to be sort of aloof and cold. So you hit it really hard on the head with her character.
Yeah, cool. That's good to hear too, because you're exactly right. That's what she is. And you find why if you read out.
Yeah.
Read through.
Yeah, but like I said, no spoilers. Yeah. I'll try to keep spoilers out of the review, but I'm not sure if I can pull that off. You know how it is.
Yeah, it's hard.
The villain character, Cash, not actually a villain. He definitely was a dark person and did things that made him out as the antagonist of the story for sure. But the way you wrote him, he wasn't villainous in a rah ha ha hand-wringing way. He was more human, in my opinion. And at least the way I read him. I don't know if that was your intent. So I wanted to ask you about that with Cash, because he drove the other side of the story the whole time, but his motivations were not purely sinister.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was really, I like to think of it as like procedural when I was writing it, because I didn't necessarily plan his character ahead of time, not in great detail. So I remember writing it because I did in a small space of time, but that's a later question. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, so this guy he's a Dark Lord, right? He's the Dark Wizard type. What can I do to make him a little bit different? I was like, I'm going to have him do something nice for somebody that's loyal to him. Because, like you buy loyalty. That's how you get it, right? And he's able to. So like, why wouldn't he? If he's feeling good. And so in that one scene, I went ahead and had him do something nice. And then that just kind of stuck around and lodged in my head, so that it turned into what you said. He's not a mustache twirling villain, although he could be, and depending on the situation, I mean, I could write like a short story or something that you could play him that way, right? Like if he's really after somebody, for whatever reason, after an enemy or something, and you don't get to see his side, you don't get a scene with him, then I think you could make him appear that way. But I thought it was fun. I like to write from the Dark Lord's perspective or the villain's perspective when I can, just to see kind of if something interesting will come out.
Yeah,
So
and
it's fun.
he that scene with bestowing the grand meal, which we'll not get too far into,
Mm,
it was such a stark contrast when you got to the confrontation portion at the end of the
mhm,
book.
mhm,
It was such a stark contrast that it actually made me kind of wish Cash had survived. And I know
mm,
that's a spoiler, but it needs to be driven home because he giving him that human quality made the character more interesting, I think, and a little likable,
mhm.
which sometimes you want to do. In some stories, it doesn't work, but in this story, I thought it worked really well.
Yeah, cool.
So, the hardest part for any author, I think, from talking to a bunch of our colleagues over the past couple of weeks, is the world building process. And you
Mm,
built essentially three worlds that you touched on, two very heavily and one very mysteriously
mm.
in this first book. So I wanted to ask you about that. How was the world building process for doing three different planes of existence essentially?
Yeah, so the
Four.
world building was again really procedural for me. um, I had, these seeds of the vibe and the characters and kind of what they needed to be challenged, and then and what they needed to support them going here and going there and all that stuff. Um, because I wrote it when I did, in a short period of time. I'll just say it. I started it for a NaNoWriMo project, and so I got through the meat of it, and then went back for another revision and added some later. Um, but that's that was the core that I did in a short period. And so I'm writing every day, and every night, trying to get to the daily goal, and not and also just kind of wanting to have fun. This is the second thing that I ever wrote to completion, and I just kind of I wanted to let loose. So that's why I chose to go with the metal concept that I had, so I could kind of be bombastic and pull in whatever, and be a little gonzo with it. And so I let the world building do that too. And so everything that shows up is either um, on demand, for the characters, or the plot in the moment, and then kind of retrofitted, or um, procedural, like I said, and kind of spins out of whatever I had decided before. And so that was something I had to do in editing, which was and revisions, which was to go in and kind of make sure, okay, does this make sense? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? And so on, and ask my alpha beta readers, did everything make sense? Like, was it too crazy? Not crazy enough? Like, where did it go? But that's pretty much how it went.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fair. How long did it take you to write Heroes Metal 1?
So 50, I did, maybe I want to say it was like 56,000 words during November of the year that I wrote it. And then
Good.
so a little bit over for the goal. And then I added the other like 20,000 or so words a couple months later when I revisited it, for revisions.
Okay, so like a
Yeah,
three,
so
four
about
months.
six, yeah, six weeks of actual writing about, and then probably a good month or two of kind of developing and editing, stuff like that.
And did
I
you go back and edit it immediately after you finished NaNoWriMo?
No, I let it sit for probably 6 weeks. I went back, added what I needed to add. Then I let it sit for, I just kind of had it ready. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I was going to be indie at that point or if I was going to try and submit. I think I actually did send out a few queries for it. But then the pandemic hit in 2020, and I was like, I got some time. I'm going to do this. And so I picked it as the first release, and just went with it. So all told, probably 3 or 4 months worth of work by the time I got everything together and put out the initial release and stuff. But 6 weeks or so of writing.
It's not bad. And
Yeah.
you said that this was the second that you written to completion. What did you finish first?
Coming to Power is the one that I finished first.
Okay. Is
Kind of
that it?
epic alternate world fantasy thing.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure of the timeline because in my head, I guess from following your Twitter timeline, I saw more Heroes Metal than I saw Coming to Power. So I thought Heroes Metal 1 came first. So
yeah, I push it a little more because there's 2 books. So and I'm gonna, since I'm further in it, I'm gonna try and finish it first. But not to neglect anything else, but you know.
It's all good. I finished a whole trilogy before I started writing anything else that I had in queue. And after doing that, I thought, why did I push it so hard?
Yeah, it's hard to decide what to do. Like do I deserve a break, or does it need me to take a break? Or or should I get it all at once so that the series buyers can buy it? It's hard to say.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your favorite part of the writing process?
My favorite part was, well, yeah, it touches on what we were just talking about. Like I really needed to let loose and just kind of celebrate the fact, because Coming to Power was the one that took me way too long to finish, because its seeds go so far back in my life. And so I was like, hey, I can do this, right? And I've learned some things and I picked up some tips, listening to writing podcasts and stuff like that. I'm gonna take the concept, I'm gonna take everything I've learned, and I'm just gonna smash it all together and see what comes out and just enjoy it. And it was really fun. It was so much fun to write through, and just to do it every day. Like when you're that excited about it, it replaces video games or movies, TV, like basically anything else. You're just like, when can I get back to my station and get a snack and a drink and write it? And that was definitely my favorite part. Excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're inspired, it just goes, and you can't wait to keep doing it. That's how I feel about each of my projects so far. On the converse, of course, what was your least favorite part of the writing process?
I don't really remember disdaining any particular part of this. Excuse me. In general, I don't editing, or not so much editing, but rewriting is not my favorite. Like when something needs to be rewritten, I'm like, does it really? So but you know, when it needs it, you know it, and so you got to just kind of buckle down and do it. But it's not very much fun. It's fun when it's done, because then you're like, you know, that's exactly what it needed. So, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, the editing revision process, from what I can tell, everybody has kind of an eye-rolling moment when they go to that point, like, do I really have to do this? But in my experience, you put it down for a while and you look at it with semi-fresh eyes and kind of return to that world, so you can feel like your sentences and your paragraphs have conveyed the point you wanted to convey, or miss the mark. And then you get the opportunity to make it better with whatever you've learned in the time between. And I think that's probably the best aspect of writing, in my opinion, is getting to apply more and more nuanced skill as you go along.
Yeah.
So we talked about Coming to Power a little bit. Heroes Metal 1. What other books have you written so far, or are you writing right now?
So that's out. In addition to those, so Out of the Deep, Heroes Metal 2 is out, which obviously it answers more questions, try to keep the same vibe. I was happy to get some feedback that it's even better. So awesome. That's what I wanted. That's what you want to hear. And then in other worlds, I've got Rajak, which is a superhero novel.
Nice. That's what I'm working on.
Yeah, it was another started from pretty simple premise. I wanted to know, or I wanted to see for myself what would happen if we had superheroes arising on a planet that's like suffused and dominated by magic, like sorcerous magic. Because most of our superhero worlds you get this especially in shows over and over again, is people are getting superpowers. What happens, right? But it's always in our world, and and just in various incarnations. What happens if it happens in the 1930s or the 70s or now, or whatever. So I just had that inkling, like, what happens if people who have to work for all their power and who value kind of the material aspects of their magic are suddenly upstaged by these people who did nothing, right? They're born with powers, or their powers manifest later in life, and suddenly they can do things just that other people have to essentially pay for. So I think it's a pretty fun book. It hasn't gotten as much attention as I wish that it would, but we just got to keep hammering until people read it. So I call it Superheroes versus the Magical 1%, the magical elite. and and there will be more at I dubbed the series Hero Planet, which sometimes I accidentally misquote because Heroes Metal, Hero Planet. But there will be more in that series. Yeah, probably not necessarily chronological, but there will be more coming in the setting. And then I've got a shorter work novella called Life City, which was another musical premise, musically inspired premise. I was listening to some Japanese noise punk band called Melt Banana. Check it out. It's really fun. And I was like, okay, so what does it look like if a story feels like this? So it's really frenetic, and the singer's super hyper and the music super hyper and crazy. But what it morphed into was actually sort of it was kind of like God just came in and like took it over. He was like, let me have this. I'm taking this one. And turned into pretty much an allegory for some various things, some kind of personal things, but some things that are going on in the world as well. And so that one I call Christian Furry Punk Apocalypse. So their world, it's anthropomorphic animal people. Their world is under threat by something that kind of looks like the Beast, and may or may not be. And they just have to, the punk singer protagonist, she's a rabbit, has to get with her friends, and they have to figure out how to keep everyone from being brainwashed by the Beast. So actually that was fun to write. It was nice and compact as well. I don't know, I love it when you get to blast through with a strong inspiration and do that. And then my Vela novel is kind of I think of it less as a dystopia and more of a false utopia, because it's not like things are not decaying. The system in place functions, and it functions well, and people are generally happy. But the protagonist and her friends are the ones who are being put upon and challenged by the situation. So the title is Children of a Shah, and the premise is that all the second-born children of this nation are pressed into mandatory military service, and so they essentially go to a military finishing school, a military academy, where they learn, their martial arts. They learn all the other things that they need to learn. But when the protagonist Ratan's friend is murdered, she realizes it may not be all that it's cracked up to be. And so one of the themes is that the authorities may or may not have your best interest at heart. And that's that one. It's a little, I guess it's kind of grittier than some of the others in a way. It's a little more on the melancholy side, which is why I thought, like, maybe I'll try this on Vela and see how it goes, because it doesn't entirely fit. It's still my voice, but it doesn't entirely fit with the same kind of vibe as my other books. So that's on Vela to read. It's got one of my favorite characters, which is Ratan's droid that she made by herself. She well, with help from her dad, but she's got a droid companion that I think has a fun story in there. And that's everything that's out.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
That sounds like that one has sort of a more, I guess, current culture, political message.
Yeah, I think some of that is in there. It's far future on their planet. So, you know, they have like space scraping buildings and flying vehicles, and, you know, they have like kind of a telekinetic based magic system as well. Like, I'd love to do space stuff in there because, you know, I always want my Star Wars fix, and I think I could pull that out of that setting. But, you know, I don't know, later. I'll have time later to get to that.
Speaking of which, real fast,
sure.
The Bone Melter reminds me of Fantasy Lightsaber.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I love glowing swords, because who doesn't? And
yeah, who does not love a glowing sword?
Yeah, and I like to reward my heroes with fun things to use. So obviously the challenge is not to make it too powerful. So, you know, that's part of why Pierce is fighting giants and things like that. It's like, if all you ever do is fight someone the same size as you, and you have a board sword that cuts through anything, it's like no challenge. So you know, hence the mechanic where it can't cut through enchanted metal, or well, there are some other things that come up later, some other weaknesses, but yeah, glowing swords are just too much fun not to use. And if you can, you want to get them on your cover as well.
Yeah. The contradiction between Pierce mowing through werewolves versus him having to essentially saw hard through giant monstrosities gave the weapon a sense of its durability and its finite capabilities, but also made it a truly epic, you know, mythical sword. Even though it was, in my head, it looked more like a lightsaber than a sword. But I think that was just because I clung to that Star Wars throwback feeling when it was first described. Yeah. So it's really an interesting weapon, I think. And in the first video I did with Donovan Walker, he described the Dawnbringer sword, and I said at the end of the video, I want one. If somebody's going to make replicas, you know, I'll be the first in line. I've always wanted a lightsaber, so I can add the Bone Melter to my collection of fantasy weapons I want to collect in my head.
Yeah, heck yeah. Yeah, I'd like one too. I guess my mental image is a little bit thicker than the Darksaber, and blue. So like, if it doesn't have the light enchantment, then it's just naked metal that can cut through, you know, almost everything. But with that, yeah, it'd be like something like that.
Yeah, and the color contrast that you set up in your background for the story, the colors for the enchanted dust, the sky, you know, being black and dark, even I got the impression that it was something that happened that I will find more about in the later books, of course.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me that you chose to do this black sky for the overland, and, you know, underland being dark as well. So the whole world was sort of cast in shadow of a certain type, which set the mood really well, in my opinion.
Cool. Nice.
And then you discussed with the Forge Master character Sev, and the concept of the different dusts, and how blue was this super rare, almost unheard of idea for the dust that was what the Bone Melter was forged out of, basically, which made it so powerful. And then it comes up later on in the story, which again, I won't spoil, but it has a specific point. I thought that was really cool. That was a unique detail that you brought to it that made it interesting and brought it full circle from the beginning of the story to the end of the story.
Cool. Yeah, nice. Yeah, the the colors, I have really strong images in my head, which incidentally is why it kills me that I can't draw. But yeah, the colors were really important, not so much, because again, it was all pretty much procedural, but it all was very vivid for me when it was happening. So I'm glad that that came through. I see the black sky with the red sun. I don't know, I'm sure you probably remember, I think it's World 3 in Super Mario Brothers. Just kind of that feel to it, the like inverted color world, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that's kind of the image I had for it. And there's a reason.
I'll find out
why. We'll find out why.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe we'll have another conversation about this in the future.
So
what advice would you give new authors, being a semi-new author yourself?
Standard one is just write, and do it, as often as you can. Less standard, I wrote something down. Let me just make sure I don't forget it.
Came prepared. I like that.
Yeah, I get, it's easy for me to forget on, short time span. So one thing that's really helped me is because I have tons of different concepts that I want to work out. There's just not enough time for everything. I'm sure this is pretty common, especially for us fantasy and science fiction authors.
Totally.
I mean, you can walk down the street and see a weird looking dog and be like, what if? But one thing that helps is to outline a new idea until you can't go any further. So like if I get one and I'm super excited, and it just won't leave me alone, and I keep thinking about it, I'll sit down, I'll work out the outline, and then inevitably I will hit, sometimes I'll get a full plot and be like, all right, I'll have that for later. Mostly I'll hit like something in Act 2 or sometimes in Act 3. That's just a wall.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can say, this is why I didn't start it right now, because I would have gotten stuck right there and be all confused with my other project and what I'm working on. So that's one helpful thing, is just get those ideas out by outlining them.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least even if you don't want to plot it out in advance, then write down everything you know about it and set it aside for later. You'll have it. Sometimes you'll write it out and it'll lose its luster, and you can say, okay, that one's not one to work on, right? And just file it away in the boneyard, and maybe you can pick it up later.
Yep, that's exactly what I do.
Yeah. So I think that's helpful. If anybody hasn't tried writing something in a short period of time, trying to do that NaNoWriMo experience or something like it, I do recommend that because you learn a lot about your habits. You learn a lot about not just mental habits, but like your actual putting of the words down. So like you'll notice more that you repeat certain phrases, or that your vocabulary in a particular area is a little bit lacking. Just kind of stuff like that. And you may not even realize until later that you learned it, but I feel like you learn those things when you try to go through something quickly. That may not be for every book, but it's fun to do, and yeah, you can learn.
Yeah, every author has go-tos, those phrases, colloquialisms, whatever you want to call them, that just they pop up constantly. I use the word though, like you would not believe. And I know that's one that's my greatest negative. It shows up every other paragraph in some way, and when my editor was editing, and now when I'm editing, I have to cut it out constantly. But you start to realize it the more you do a thing, and it's like exercise, putting in the reps. You develop that skill and that ability to know where your weakness is so that you can shore it up, and it doesn't take as much time out of enjoying the process of writing, in my opinion. So if on the advice idea, if you could sit down with yourself for a half hour a couple of years back before you actually started writing, but we're in that I kind of want to do this mode, what sort of advice would you have given yourself that you know now?
Yeah. So I've been working on something or other basically since I was a teen. But if I could go, a significant amount of years back, I would say try to finish it sooner. Like, don't play EVE Online, or don't get into whatever other games or MMOs, or binging on Netflix or whatever it is that's taking up the time. Uh, Use that time and finish something now and start getting better now, instead of kind of writing when you feel like it, and then entertaining yourself with the rest of your free time.
That's a
Like, it's
great.
not a massive regret, because what I've gotten now is different and better now than it would have been then. But at the same time, I would have more things finished, and then I could move on to the other things that I really want to get to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's a certain mindset when you're first starting out. I know I experienced it when I was working on the Wizard's Mistake, where it wasn't finished, and I could kind of use that as an excuse to not finish it
Mhm.
in my head, so I could justify going and doing something else, or playing some video games, or watching TV, or whatever. And I was working on it during the pandemic, so I had literally nothing else to do except sit at home. And it was either watch TV, play video games, or write novels. And that was the whole point of what I wanted to do at that time. The whole reason I'd set my life up before the pandemic even hit, so that I could take the time to write. And I found myself wasting it.
Mhm.
I had to keep refocusing and saying, why are you putting this off? Why aren't you getting it done? What's not working here?
Mhm.
What didn't you think about? And we tell ourselves all sorts of excuses, I think, to avoid that, the publishing fear.
Mhm.
I have to put this out and let people look at it and tell me it's awful. And if I don't put it out, then nobody can tell me it's awful. And that may be one of those excuses. Like, I'll play video games with my friends. I'll watch the show on Netflix because everybody's talking about it.
Mhm.
So that's an excellent piece of advice for anybody that wants to do this, is if you're going to do it, put your foot down on the gas and go.
Yeah. It's a lot more fun too when you commit to it,
Mm-hmm.
than always having, I call it writer's guilt. Like, you're like, this thing needs to exist and I'm not working on it. Like, I'm a terrible person for not doing it.
Great name.
um, yeah. So
Name for
it, yeah. And sometimes you have it when it's not warranted. Like, like, we have to go to a wedding this weekend or something like that. Like, if you're at a wedding celebrating with people, it's okay that you're not writing. But that still sometimes feel it, like, man, I could be home working on the thing.
Yep, it's in your head.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely agree. When it comes to the victory lap, a lot of us, I've noticed from talking with folks on Twitter, they still feel that what is it called, the imposter syndrome, that you're bandied about a lot. Even those who finished and published their first book and have gotten some reviews, and one day they're gushing about it, and then the next day there's all these posts about how they feel like they're not living up to it, I guess, because they're not working on something else.
Mhm.
You do have to take time to enjoy yourself. You do have to take time to live life, because as an author, you can't convey life to other people if you don't live it.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to have fresh emotions and fresh experiences of some kind. Got to get, yeah. I'm sure a lot of people are dry right now too, because, some people are still kind of living a pandemic life. A lot of people have kind of let go, but it's still, everything's kind of crazy in certain ways, and there's a lot of stress. So, you gotta live so that you can have something to write about.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Totally. Now, Heroes Metal 1 was a great read. As I'd said to you privately, I'm going to say it now on the show, there were a couple of points where I was pulled out of the immersion, and I think that might be because, as you explained to me now, you kind of took a procedural angle towards the way you wrote it,
Yeah.
And that's where in retrospect, I think parts of it pulled me away from the enjoyment, only because there were certain minor pieces here and there that felt a little bit like script writing or screenwriting more than novel writing, where you were sort of just dictating the scene, and it didn't feel very um, descriptive. It didn't feel
Mm.
very engrossing,
Mm.
and but it came back every time I got into like the serious detail of what was going on. The battle scenes were extremely flourished. There's a lot going on in all of them, and it almost seemed impossible at some points, which I thought played the
Nice.
fantasy angle great. And that's what I meant by the anime vibes, because I am a very
Yeah.
visual reader. So when I'm reading something, I can try and picture it. And that's the same way that I try to convey in my writing, is make these broad uh, scenes that play like movies in your head, hopefully, when you
Mhm.
read it. And every once in a while, in the slower parts, it felt a little less like a novel and more like a script. So I
Hmm.
felt like I was pulled back behind the camera
Yeah.
and started to see that it was just people, this person placed here, this person placed here, these people are talking about this.
Mm.
And it pulled me out of the enjoyment for a brief time,
Mm.
but it was the first book, and I had to keep that in mind, because going back and reading The Wizard's Mistake, I made a bunch of rookie errors when I wrote that thing too, and part of them was set placing, I think is what it's called, where you try
Mm.
to set the scene, but if you don't set the scene in a way that's descriptive enough, it
Mm.
feels a little hollow.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can imagine that. Without knowing specifically which scenes, I'm going to guess that part of it is an artifact of writing it really fast, um, and being really excited too, and wanting to get to those set pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's, that's a challenge for all of us.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sure, like, you want to get to the cool stuff, but there's characterization and stuff like that that has to happen in
And
between.
story building that may
Yeah,
require a downtime period, piece,
yeah.
a section of what you're writing that you actually have to dedicate to showcasing, other
Mhm.
than getting to the cool plot points, I guess is the best way to
Yeah,
describe it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and also there was, I'll say it 'cause maybe it'll help somebody out by thinking about it. But uh, I was kind of experimenting with putting a little more humor in. I'm not a humorist. Like, I can be, I can make my wife laugh, and sometimes I
Well,
get
the
lucky
manner
and
sometimes.
yeah, I know. Sometimes I get lucky in conversation and pull a good one, but like for the most part, like it's not easy, it's not snappy for me. And so I wanted to work on getting more of that in. So when I go back and look at the manuscript for this, or I'm happen to be listening to it for something else right now, um, there are a few things that to me are like, I don't think I would have done that now. But at the same time, I want it to be the artifact that it is. And I don't want to necessarily, unless I have a really good reason for a second edition, I don't necessarily want to go back and take them out. So yeah, it's kind of a funny thing, I think, when you go back and look at your own stuff, especially after getting feedback, from kind of the outside world, to decide what to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I appreciate the insight because I'll remember that, looking at the quieter scenes, uh, going forward.
They're hard.
Yeah,
It's hard for anybody
yeah.
when you get to downtime scenes. Um, I had one of the reviewers of G Sedai to say that the story was super fast and it kept jumping from
Mm.
action point to action point to action point. But then they focused really hard on this very small, quiet time that I put in the middle, because I thought while I was writing it, this is way too much action. It's literally
Mm.
just running across the world, cutting paths of bodies.
Yeah.
So I need there to be some sort of background that brings these characters together. My editor said the same thing.
Mm.
She said that this is a lot of action, but you have this um, concept between these two main characters that I think you need to expand on. So you got to find a place to put that in. And I did, and that's what that reviewer focused in on. They were like, and then this point was really impressive to me because it cut the speed. And I thought, if I'd never gotten that advice or never even thought of that, this person wouldn't have picked up on it, and maybe the book would have been less than it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
So, but at the same time, like you were saying about comedy, you have to take a couple of risks here and there and try something out. If it doesn't work, you don't do it in your further books. You got constantly evolve and grow.
Yeah.
And you putting those in there, it made the dialogue fun because they were kind of campy bantering points that were really enjoyable, and it helped mesh the characters together. And if there were a few where you went, yeah, this kind of fell flat now that I'm reading it a second time, you just don't put that particular aspect in the next time you do dialogue.
Right.
You've essentially taken your old manuscript and made your new ones better by doing it that way. I think that's awesome. Yeah. Something we should all be trying to do as we grow into this journey, as I like to call it, as it really is. It's a long, long walk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you made me think, to step back a sec, you made me think of a roller coaster with the kind of pacing and the beats. Sometimes you have to ride to the top and you kind of stop for a second, it tilts over, and then you come crashing down.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's kind of like you all outlines that I do as the roller coaster. The first half is always the setup, the build, the character interactions, get everybody hooked up, and then you hit the apex where everything's got to crash down. You have to have that confrontation, that harsh point, and then boom, everything drops and it gets real rushed. Then you have that short up, and then you go again, and it just keeps coasting from there until the end.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's a great observation. So we have a couple of minutes if you have any questions for me about parts of your book that I should have picked up on.
Without spoilers.
Yeah.
I can probably fairly safely ask, like, what would you say is going to happen next? Because it's not like a cliffhanger ending, but it's obvious that something else is going to happen. So, like, based on the information you have.
Well, I'm curious about the deaths.
Okay.
And what's going to happen with that, because it was very mysteriously teased towards the end. I did not see the betrayal coming in the way that you wrote through. I'm not going to say who or what, but it did happen. Try to be spoilerless as much as possible.
Yeah, some people like betrayal beats, so maybe it's a selling point.
Maybe. There is one, and I didn't see it coming, which is a credit to you, because it was so far flung. When one of the characters displayed an ability that was intrinsically said couldn't happen, I went suspect, but didn't really think anything of it. I just thought maybe the character was hiding some power.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
No, it was more like the character was hiding some power, and the way that character was written, they definitely would, in my opinion. So it meshed fine. And then when the betrayal did happen, I went, oh, damn. So, the depths were not teased on enough for me to make any assumptions, though, about what was going to come next. It was more of okay, there's a lot more going on, and minor spoiler, Cash knew, which I thought was kind of a messed up thing in that confrontation point, because he knew more than the heroes did, but didn't get the chance to impart any of that. So they're kind of flying blind at this point. And that sets up a sense of urgency, in my opinion, that I hope will make people who read Heroes Metal 1 want to read 2 and finish the story out so that they can see for real what happened. I know I'm interested enough at this point. I'm going to read 2 just for fun, and we'll give it some time before we have another interview like this if you'd like to.
Yeah, heck yeah.
yeah, I couldn't say what's going to happen next, other than Axborn has an interesting path ahead of him.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to see, not just on a grand fantasy scale, but how that affects his relationship with Scythia.
Mhm. Yeah, that will be, yeah, that'll be touched on.
Yeah, those are the takeaways for me.
Yeah, cool, nice.
Awesome. Well, this has been a pleasure. I love getting to sit down and
Same.
talk with authors, and starting this review show was sort of a whim, which is fun because that's my entire thing.
Yeah.
But it was sort of a whim that I found to be the most inspirational aspect of my months these days. So I appreciate you coming on with me and talking about Heroes Metal 1, How Black the Sky.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
It's good to see you, and we'll talk some more.
All right. Catch you later.
Thanks, man.